I'm sure that we all have those people in our life. Maybe some of us have a couple, maybe some of us just have one. But those people who have that unique ability to speak directly to the needs of our heart with as little words as possible. Those people who they just don't beat around the bush. They don't mince words. They get right to the core of who we are. They know us so well that with just a single phrase, with just a single sentence, they're able to cut right to our needs, right to where the Lord wants to speak to us. Whatever it is that we're dealing with, we know that we can go to them and they're just going to give it to us straight. And I know who the first person was for me who treated me this way. My mother's boss. My mother worked in the operating room for many years at one of the hospitals in Rockford, and I had just started diving deep into long-distance running. I was like a freshman in high school and was really starting to take that sport seriously, was starting to find a lot of success in the sport, and my mom's boss, his name was Dr. Jarrett. He was himself a very successful runner, not only in high school but in college, and he was just a person that didn't mess around. Right? He was very hardcore, and he had been watching me for many years at that point, and so he had gotten to know me well. And he just had that ability to sit me down and say, listen, Grant, like if you really want to be a successful long-distance runner, if you want to start to win races, if you want to get to state, if you want to medal, this is what you have to do. You have to take care of yourself, you have to get your sleep, start logging your miles, right? Just the very basic stuff. And he held me to those things. He held me accountable. But he just had that ability with no fluff to just tell it to me straight. And right, looking back on that relationship was so important to me as I continued to mature as a long-distance runner. And I would start to come to him with all my questions, right? What do I do now? Right? What do I do next? How do I get faster? How do I get better? And looking back on that relationship, now I can say that what he was addressing wasn't necessarily my questions. He was addressing me. Right? He was addressing me as a person. Because yes, his mentorship was tailored to making me a faster runner, making me a better runner, but more importantly, he was making me a better person. The parallels between any sort of discipline, right? Like in maturing in that discipline, they are always paired with our maturity as a person, as a more full human being. And we very much see that sense of clarity, that sense of cutting right to the core in the language that Jesus uses in today's gospel. We hear him say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and you should love your neighbor as yourself." And this is certainly, right, one of the most famous things that Jesus said. I'm sure most of us can quote it from memory. But it is also one of the clearest things that Jesus ever said. And when the scribe comes to him with that question, right, Lord, what do I have to do to get to heaven? What's the greatest of the commandments? Jesus wastes no time. He just cuts right to the chase. Right? The greatest commandment is you love God and you love your neighbor. That's it. No fluff, no messing around. That's what you got to do. He seems to cut right to the center of the scribe's heart. And I'm sure we can think of those people in our life who are that for us, right? Those people who just cut right to the chase. And those kind of relationships can almost be refreshing, right? Knowing that we can go to them and they're not worried about making us feel good. They're just telling us what we need to hear. But telling us what we need to hear, right, it's not to hurt our feelings. They have the ability to do that because they know us. And they love us so much that there's a trust that's there between the two parties that gives them the ability to be so frank. And we see this pattern with Jesus within the scriptures. Jesus never avoids the questions when someone comes to him with a question, but he always sees the person beyond the question itself. What he is concerned with is the questioner, not the question. What's most important to Jesus is the needs of the questioner's soul. What do I need to tell this person in order for him to better follow me, to get him to heaven? Right? We all have many, many layers, many masks that we use to guard our heart. Right? But it is ultimately Christ who has the ability at the end of the day to penetrate with that clarity, with no fluff, right to the core of our very being, to address the need, not the question. And we see how Jesus uses this strategy differently right throughout the scriptures. He addresses the person, not the question. Right? So a couple weeks ago, we saw James and John, and they said, Lord, what do we want to sit at your right? We want to sit at your left. What do we need to do to get to that point? And Jesus is also very frank and blunt with them, but he treats them with a greater gentleness, right, than he does with the scribe in today's gospel, where it's just straight to the point. So we see Jesus likes to pivot within the scriptures when addressing the needs of the hearts of the people that he's communicating with. But the lesson for us today, as we reflect on this gospel and as we reflect on that characteristic of Jesus, to be so clear, to be so blunt, to just be so frank, to come out as to say, if you want to get to heaven, these two things are what you need to do. You love God and you love your neighbor. Right? If you want to remove all the other things, that is it. Those are the two most important. And the reminder for us today, the encouragement for us today, is to have the courage to give Christ the permission to be that clear for us within our own lives, to cut to the core. And that sense of allowing him to do that can certainly be risky. But receiving that clarity from the Lord and allowing him to cut right to the center will allow him to say the same thing to us that he says to the scribe within the gospel. If you do these things, if you do what I command you, you are not far from the kingdom. You are not far from the kingdom of God.